If we could put aside for one moment the illegality of Uber's operation here in London, and if we could put aside the unethical business practice of securing investment from countries with atrocious human rights records, then what we are left with is a fallacy of composition. Now, a fallacy of composition is when a decision is reached using one singular factor alone. Now, Uber's consumer base is pretty big. It's about 2.5 million, and about 700,000 of those have decided to issue a petition demanding the reinstatement of Uber's licence here in London. Now, I've every reason to believe that these signatures are genuine, but the decision would be made based on a fallacy of composition. Now, if you consider that it is the driver that is the primary consumer of Uber's product, because without a passenger there is no driver, so it has to be the driver who is the primary consumer, then you've got other mitigating factors to take into consideration, haven't you? Factors such as below minimum wage, exploitation, 0-hour contracts, no sick pay, no holiday entitlement, no accumulation of a pension because you don't have to submit a national insurance number, no workers' rights, no employment rights, no legal rights, no ability to file litigation against a company that has complete control over you. If you think about it for a moment, you begin to realise that the situation is far more complex than just a decision based on your own perspective. And if you can take an observant position of Uber the brand, you begin to realise that there is nothing unintentional about this company. So the Dickensian era they harken back to is very much an intentional plan set in place to drill down workers' rights. And if you have a smart app at this end and the barrier to entry in the middle is minimised to elementary level, then it's inevitable you will have a fallout at the other end, isn't it? And yet they have used technology in an ultra-viral way to disguise the fallout. Uber was sold to the policymakers on the back of efficiency savings. Effectively, they would disincentivise the car owner from using their own personal transport. Now, over a period of time, what we have seen is grossly inefficient, because the only way Uber can demonstrate efficiencies is by oversupplying the market. An en masse oversupply of the marketplace is grossly inefficient, and its impact is causing a spike in pollution and congestion. Now, considering Uber doesn't pay any corporation tax, we'd be right to consider this as a looting on infrastructure. Uber employ an aggressive smash and grab policy, regardless of the consequences. They haven't got time to build on growth or liquidity, but they did a very good job at buying it. And they did so from countries with questionable human rights ethics such as Saudi Arabia and Russia's Bershbank. Russia's Bershbank, incidentally, also invests in the taxi hailing app Get. Maybe Putin knows something we don't and is eyeing Israel as some kind of lucrative venture. Uber's operation is illegal here in the capital. They operate as a transgression of the 1998 private hire regulations, and the vehicle doesn't meet the conditions of fitness, nor the driver meet the required standard necessary to work on the on-demand market. And considering they insist on infracting into this market, then they fall foul of every discriminatory order there is. The vehicle doesn't account for the wheelchair dependent, nor the hearing impaired, nor the sight impaired. Now, one might wonder how a company like this was able to break into the market in the first place. Uber do not offer their service to anyone that hasn't got a smartphone or credit card, and there is a reason for this. Uber Technologies is heavily involved in logistics, and logistics is concerned with data amassing and data profiling. In fact, they want to be the market leader in logistics. Now, their database is vast, so it wouldn't surprise me if they weren't at least tempted to sign that petition on others' behalf. In fact, the information gained from that database, well, the KGB would have given their right arm for that kind of controlling capacity. Now, what better way to break into resistant markets illegally than by having friends in high places? Stephen Hilton was the senior advisor to David Cameron. His wife, Rachel Whetstone, was the vice president of policy for Uber Technologies. She also happened to be the godparent to one of David Cameron's children. As soon as the previous administration had been shamed out of public office, George Osborne secured a lucrative deal with the private investment bank BlackRock. BlackRock is reported to be paying Mr. Osborne, the now ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, the sum of £600,000 a year to work a one-day week. BlackRock, incidentally, also invest £500 million in Uber Technologies. It's clear to see then, isn't it, that the promise of a nice little number when you've finished up in high office will secure your vested interest, especially if the lobbyist happens to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Opportunists will always seek the path of least resistance, won't they? And as we have seen, TfL afforded Uber the level of protectionism that the nanny shows Damien in the film The Omen. Now, there's only so long you can insulate this type of product, isn't there, before the cracks begin to show. And they might have shown sooner if it hadn't have been for the intentional policy of enmeshing statistics with those enjoyed by the licensed taxi trade. By blurring the demarcation between taxis and private hire and rideshare, they was able to bestow upon Uber an air of credibility. Nevertheless, there was going to be a fallout sooner or later, wasn't there? And at driver level, we've seen an inexorable rise in sexual assault crime, we've seen insurmountable accidents, and we've seen an unprecedented level of revocation orders. Add to that a couple of murders and a terrorist attack, and what you're left with is something a lot more horrific than The Omen. There is corporate abuse in every corner of Uber's operation. They are guilty of cyber theft, of a tracking and hacking scandal, and of greyballing. Now, greyballing is an insidious ring fencing of an individual to prevent them from being privileged to certain information. And there is a predatory pricing policy. Predatory pricing is illegal, but they'll take money from countries with questionable human rights records and then subsidise fares to break the back of the incumbent trade. After they have done so, sure as hell, investors will be looking for a return. Now, if you was the licensed taxi trade and you went from being the safest form of transport in London to being assumed to be the unsafest, then you'd probably demonstrate against this corporation also, wouldn't you? It's incomprehensible, isn't it, that this phenomenal technology isn't being used to apply provisions that would safeguard both the driver and the passenger, but used instead to protect vested interests. And vested interests are exactly what embedded Uber here in the system. Now, for the 600,000 plus people who signed the petition, they have been manipulated from a position of wanting or desiring a product and moved over to a position of now needing this product and will apply it as a prerequisite to everything they do. And that also means the decisions they make. Not for a moment have they considered mitigating circumstances. They would consider this entirely to be about consumer choice. But it is far less about consumer choice than it is about self-entitlement. And that is a fallacy of composition.